Robert Kiyosaki. This is another important interview for Capitalist Manifesto. And the reason we do these programs is so many people have no idea what communism or socialism is. So I wrote Capitalist Manifesto as a way of educating the general public of what's going on the other side, because most of us only see capitalism, but we don't see communism or socialism. So our guest today is a very important guest, is Brigadier General Robert Spalding. He was part of Trump's National Security Strategy, NSS, and he's also the author of China's Silent Takeover While America's Elite Slept. So General Spalding, I'm honored to have him part of this program. He's going to be talking about what China is doing. You know, they're nice and friendly with us, to capitalism, what their ultimate plan is. So this is, again, part of the Capitalist Manifesto, and as I was saying to the general, is that when I went to the academy, I had an economics teacher that had us read the Communist Manifesto. And today, back in, now 2021, I can see the Communist Manifesto coming into life. I also flew in Vietnam, where I saw what it was like to fight communism, and I'm still fighting communism. So with that, welcome to the program, General Spalding.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So would you please give us a bit of your background and what you did for the Trump administration, because a friend of mine and all this. So, and then we get into how you see what China's really doing with America.
Well, I found myself in the first year of the Trump administration, and it was primarily because I had an opportunity as a young major in the Air Force to go live in China with my family. So I spent a year learning Chinese, and we lived in Shanghai. And this was right around the time that China entered the WTO. So it was growing like gangbusters. We traveled the country, got to know the people, the language, the culture, the history of China quite well. And this set me on a path that was really, was different than my colleagues in uniform. So when they all went to the Middle East, I had gone to China. And so as I rose in rank, the Air Force decided they wanted to send me back. And so I had a number of seasoning assignments that included a year at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City, where I met a lot of industry leaders in the United States, a lot of foreign officials, and then 2 years working for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leading a team focused on the competition between the U.S. and China, primarily economic, financial, and industrial. And then I went to Beijing to be the senior defense official and defense attaché to the People's Liberation Army for a short time before coming into the administration. And I was brought there to help develop the strategy that we're currently executing as a country vis-a-vis China. And so it was mostly regarding economic, financial, and industrial issues that I was focused, not so much on the military.
But talk about good fortune, to actually live in China, to speak the language, and then to serve President Trump, or former President Trump. So as not only a brigadier general, but also working for the national security strategy with Trump, what are your concerns that Americans do not see, or most Westerners do not see, that the Chinese are up to? I mean, are they the good guys? Are we the bad guys? Or what's happening there?
Well, so I have to mention, too, that prior to going to China, I was completing a PhD in economics and statistics. So my goal was to go to Wall Street and make my fortune. Then I decided I'm going to go to China, and that kept me in the Air Force for a long time. So I had a PhD in economics, but I was also a B-2 pilot. So I understood warfare.
little faster than my Huey.
Yeah, way faster and way higher, and a lot stealthier.
Yeah.
In all manner. And so, I had a concept in my mind of the way that the United States fought war that was really, that came from my background in the Air Force. And I understood, I think, war at a very high level because of that, because what the B-2 does is essentially kick down the door and enable the rest of the joint force to come in and do their job. And we take out the integrated air defense system. In Kosovo, we basically brought Serbia to its knees in order to, fulfill a UN mandate that they stop, murdering the Kosovars. And so I understood how to use the military as a means of attaining a political outcome. What I found in my time at the Pentagon, as I was studying what the Chinese Communist Party was doing, was that they had used the tools of globalization and the internet very much in the same way we had used the tools of my B-2 bomber to affect political outcomes, but also economic and social outcomes that favored the Chinese Communist Party. And so, and even to the point where, for example, my son, I remember he's a senior in college, and he sends a text to me and says, "Dad, my teacher just said that China is a democracy." And I said, "Well, you live there, I live there." So this is the power of the Chinese Communist Party to leverage, our institutions, our way of life, to not only strengthen themselves, but to do so in a way that really makes it seem like they're like us, but they are in no way like America.
So what are your concern with the stealth war? What do Americans not know, not just Americans, but the free world or the capitalist world not know that that you know?
Well, think about it in this manner. If the USSR in Khrushchev had gone to the UN and said, "We don't want to fight. We actually believe in the principles that you are espousing here in the United Nations, and we want to help promote an open world. We want to be partners with you." And rather than banging the shoe and saying, "We will crush you, we will bury you." And what if we had then said, "Okay, instead of protecting ourselves from you and your active measures, we're going to fully embrace you as a society and welcome your citizens, your business people, welcome your complete integration with your society into our society." And then you have to wonder, well, what would the outcome be? As you know, we wouldn't even trade with the Soviet Union because we were concerned about they're using our technology against us. And so we were fundamentally isolated in terms of our economy. Well, this idea that Khrushchev had, that we will crush you, is the same idea that the Chinese Communist Party has, except rather than doing what Khrushchev did, they said, "We want to be your partner." And in fact, it started when Nixon went back in 1972. It continued with Deng Xiaoping's visit to the United States in 1979. And essentially it was, we're going to integrate and we're going to voluntarily enable the power and the economic growth of China because we believe that it's going to be mutually beneficial. In reality, what the Chinese Communist Party was doing was taking innovation, technology, talent, and most importantly, capital, because the United States has 40% of the investable capital in the world, to build their country, to build their regime, but to do so in a way that didn't really show that they were willing to adopt things like human rights and civil liberties and rule of law, and most importantly, free trade and an open financial system. And so really what they've done is they've completely bilked us, and in doing so, they've hollowed out our society, not just millions of jobs, but also our industrial capacity, while at the same time building their own. And they've done it all in order to perpetuate their rule over the Chinese people.
And a lot of what you have here, I won't mention any names because I work in the investment world, but a lot of these big American funds are taking Chinese capital, and what Chinese capital is doing with them. So we fund Chinese, but they take our technology. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So imagine, for instance, if you're a venture capital firm and you have several $billion, you're a Silicon Valley venture capital firm and you have several $billion invested in Chinese companies. And China comes to you and says, "We want you to do X or else." What's your response going to be? How are you going to act? What are you going to be receptive to? The same thing is, if the People's Bank of China came to you and you happen to have a hedge fund, for example, and you're living in New York and you're running an investment firm and you're taking institutional capital, and the People's Bank of China comes to you and says, we want to invest $5 billion. And you know that you get 10% off the top of that, plus a carry. And you're saying, okay, so what are you going to be receptive to? What's going to motivate you? And if the Chinese Communist Party comes to you and says, hey, will you do X? What are you going to do? I think that's the thing that you find within business, is that there is so many incentives that have that, whether you're in the financial industry or whether you're in corporate America, that if you don't do what the Chinese Communist Party asks you to do, there's you'll either lose their investment in you, you'll lose your investment in China, or you will lose access to the Chinese market. When you tie all these things together and you realize that China is integrated in every democracy around the world, and you realize that most of the policies are set in democracies with a large influence from the wealthy elite in those countries, because they're often the ones that fund lobbying efforts into the capitals. Then you begin to understand what the Chinese Communist Party has built, which is a quite very favorable influence machine that operates in every capital in the world, and operates in all the international institutions like the UN and World Bank.
Right. I traveled the world. I was in Cameroon, and I saw these trenching machines going down these really back roads. I said, who are those guys? I said, well, they're the Chinese. They're putting fiber optic cable in. I'm going, well, what's the price of that fiber optic cable? Right? Do you know what I mean? And the average person doesn't even think about it.
Well, and it's probably, most likely, it's free, because what the Chinese figured out was that Silicon Valley built this wonderful economic engine, and the product they were selling was their ability to use your data, and then with machine learning and artificial intelligence, turn around and influence your perceptions, your consumer habit patterns. And it really became what drives the global economy today, is the use of individual data for selling the ability to influence those behaviors. Now, it's not just economic, it's not just the shoes you buy, it is increasingly how you look at the world from a social perspective, and how you look at the world from a political perspective. And you begin to see the power of that in companies in China like Baidu, like Alibaba, like Tencent, like SenseTime, like ByteDance, which powers the AI behind apps like TikTok. So it's a completely different world than when you were flying helicopters in Vietnam, and even when I was flying bombers, prior to the introduction of globalization, the internet. It's completely different in terms of the ability to influence individual behaviors using individual data.
So, Robert, not having at your level, so many of my friends go, what's going on? Why is social media seem to be going against us? I call Silicon Valley at high risk socialist media. I mean, how can they take down President Trump? How can they censor somebody? How can they get what I consider un-American or undemocratic policies to be filtrated into our system? Is that because, is Silicon Valley beholden to China? I mean, is that too dangerous a question to ask?
Well, there is a convergence. There's, of course, the Chinese Communist Party has been enabled through globalization and the internet, but there's also been a rise in especially American universities and other universities in the West, of postmodernism, especially what's called applied postmodernism, which would be more of an activism that is based on postmodernism, and which really goes back to French philosophers. And the French philosophers, and this is really detailed in a book called Cynical Theories, French philosophers believe that power structures in societies arise not from, certainly in the post-Enlightenment period, facts and science, but really from the way we talk about things. So controlling the narrative. So who talks and what they say is very important in terms of, how a society is organized, and therefore we need to deconstruct the way the West was organized, because it was organized to preference certain races and certain people. The Chinese Communist Party also likes control of the narrative, because that's what Mao Zedong really understood what he used to defeat the Nationalist Party to win control of China, was control of the narrative through something he called People's War. People's War is really political warfare, and political warfare is really about controlling the narrative, controlling people's perceptions of things, and ensuring that they support your point of view. And that, what the Chinese Communist Party has done, has been able to export that through globalization and the internet. And they found, in the United States, very willing partners in this type of dialogue. For instance, you've seen recently where the Chinese Communist Party is supporting things and using talking points like from Black Lives Matter. They did that in Alaska when they had the news conference with Secretary of State Blinken, because they understand this postmodernism, this applied postmodernism mirrors what they do, which is try to control the narrative. And so there is a synergy that is working between this applied postmodernism and what the Chinese Communist Party wants to do. And so they work together. They're not necessarily that they were developed by China. It's just they are harnessing things that are already happening in our own society. What China wants to do, what the party wants to do, is make sure that we stay divided. And applied postmodernism is a very divisive thing.
Right.
It says we're going to preference what one person says over another. And so the way this works, the way influence works today is very, very interesting. For example, with regard to the coronavirus, in 2015, Xi Jinping paid a visit to Imperial College of London and gave them millions of dollars for, among other things, epidemiology research. Now, it just so happens that the main report that was driving a lot of the hype with regard to lockdowns and masks and everything came out of Imperial College of London. You may remember it said over 2 million Americans will die because of coronavirus. Now, the tie between the influence of the party on academic institutions and international institutions is not well known. It's not well studied. It's not well documented. And so when that report comes out, and then a Harvard professor takes that report, he puts it in a tweet, and he says, "Oh my God, we need to do something about this now. What are the Chinese doing?" And then the WHO says, the Chinese are using lockdowns, never been used before. A week later, they're like, knockdowns really stop the spread of the coronavirus in China. And then our CDC says, well, the WHO says we should do this. And so it begins to gather momentum. Remember, we're all connected. Everything is connected. And so it starts with that credible report coming out. And then that gets repeated by social media influencers like Professor Dingle at Harvard. And then that gets spread throughout the social media, and it gets reposted. And the more times you hear it, the more times people begin to believe it, and they begin to become afraid. So you see the same type of pattern happening. And because of all these institutions and their connection, and most importantly, their financial relationship with the party, they can begin this process where they can drive policy in the direction that they want.
Correct. At military school, they always talked about divide and conquer. To keep conquered, keep dividing. So when I see identity politics, I see victim politics. I'm LBGT, I'm black, I'm Hispanic, I'm this, I'm whatever you are. And they keep dividing us. And then, like I'm a lot older than you, but I remember when coming back from Vietnam, I landed at Norton Air Force Base out in California, and I get spit on. I got hit by eggs and all this stuff. We were being divided. And it started on the college campuses. And now I notice they have all of these different subjects on campus and all this. I've talked to so many young people who are in college today or in school today. They're afraid to say things because the teacher is so hard left that if they counter the hard left rhetoric that I think started when I got spit on and hit by eggs in 1972.
If you say the right things, you're good. If you say the wrong things, you're bad. It doesn't matter what you look like or what your background is. That's what and even it can be counter to facts.
Right.
Like, for instance, we can say lockdowns work, and you have no data whatsoever to show that. A lot of people will point, well, it worked in China. And I said, do you believe China's GDP numbers? Do you believe any numbers that their companies put out in terms of financial requirements and 10Qs and 10Ks? How can you believe then what they did with the coronavirus, which says we had nothing since April of 2020? I mean, this is the insanity of where this has gone today, and the internet really just enables its growth and spread.
So let's get back to education, because that's what Rich Dad stands for. Like I believe, Trump and I are good friends. We believe in free market capitalism. I think that's why he got taken down by social media. But you mentioned something about Confucius Institutes. Now, I've seen those things. Confucius was supposedly a peaceful Asian guy, which is not me. But anyway, so what are Confucius Institutes doing on college campuses?
Well, I mean, first of all, who pays for the Confucius Institutes? I mean, that's usually you go to what is the purpose of an organization? You go to who's paying their bills. Well, who pays their bills is the Chinese Communist Party, and more importantly, the United Front Work Group, which is the propaganda arm of the Chinese Communist Party. That's who pays for Confucius Institutes. So if you want to know what the Confucius Institute is, understand that's who's paying the bills. In other words, they are the propaganda arm, the external propaganda arm of the Chinese Communist Party. And again, their job is to ensure that on US campuses where they exist, the narrative with regard to China and the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people are according to what the Chinese Communist Party says it should be. So if you say something about Taiwan, if you say something about Tibet, if you say something about Hong Kong, if you say something about the Uyghurs, then it must conform to what the Chinese Communist Party's message is, which is, hey, in terms of genocide, nothing going on here. In terms of, why Tibetans are self-immolating, well, it's nothing to do with us. And why the Hong Kong is no longer a democracy? Well, it's not because of the Chinese Communist Party. These types of things is what the Chinese Confucius Institutes do.
So this man of peace, or a wise man, Confucius, is really an agent of the Chinese government.
Well, it's funny because in his Analects, Confucius, when he's asked, he said, he's asked by a pupil, Master, if you were made emperor, what would be the first thing that you would do? And Confucius says, I would rectify the names. And what he's saying is, I would control what people say, because if I control what they say, I control what they think and do. And so essentially that's what Confucius Institutes, that's what the United Front Work Group is about. That's what the Chinese academic system is about, is all getting everybody to think the same way, speak the same way, and therefore act the same way.
So that's what's happening when I'm afraid to even speak to you right now. I mean, because we can get deplatformed, attacked. I've been taken down so many times.
We've gotten so far away from what America is as an ideal and as an institution, and frankly, the Chinese Communist Party loves that because it allows them to very easily emphasize those differences and use them as vulnerabilities, and they use them against us. There's a video going around social media right now where a gentleman is holding up a sign that says, stop the CCP's use of anti-Asian narrative. And then a guy that is, basically promoting the CCP is trying to cover it up with his sign in Chinese. And because the Chinese Communist Party basically wants to see anti-Asian, violence here in the United States, because it allows them, it perpetuates that narrative. It creates this divisiveness and enables it and encourages it, and it's something that they see as it's opportunistic for them. If we're fighting amongst ourselves, then we can't work together to counter what they're doing to us, and that's the whole goal.
It's divide to conquer, to keep conquered, keep dividing. It's military 101. And the other question I have, and you don't have to answer it because it's pretty touchy questions. We have, they had the Uyghurs, but you also had Tibet. My sister was ordained by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he said His Holiness the Dalai Lama said his mistake was he trusted Mao. You know what I mean? And they kicked him out of Tibet to take the country. So you have Hong Kong today. Then you have Taiwan. My immediate question for you is this: how safe is Taiwan? I mean, do you think they would? There's three things that go. First, you have a currency war, which we have. Then we have a trade war, which we have. When do we go to a shooting war? And would the shooting war possibly be over Taiwan? I mean, the Chinese, since it was Formosa, they've wanted Taiwan. What are the possibilities from a military general's point of view that we go to a shooting war?
So first of all, the United States and China aren't going to go to war because we both have nuclear weapons. But I do believe that within the next 5 years, you'll see China move on in Taiwan. No doubt in my mind.
Will they invade them?
Yeah, I think so.
So it will be non-nuclear. It will be traditional military.
Right. And just like the Soviets moved on Berlin, just so like they moved on Czechoslovakia, it's going to be something of that nature. That's what I believe.
Wow. Well, General Spalding, I thank you for your contribution. I thank you for sharing what you know. Again, I'd like to encourage people to get your book, Stealth War, is How We're Losing to China. And I appreciate all you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thanks. Thank you all very much.